Today's Shmoozin episode is an emotionally charged journey with an inspirational teacher, Rav Noam Koenigsberg, whose love for the Jewish people and our homeland Israel runs to the very deepest places in his heart. Raised in America in a dedicated religious Zionist family, in the late 90s, Rav Noam and his young family fell in love with the beautiful religious communities in Gaza, only to be unbelievably dragged from their home by Israeli security forces in the 2005 Gush Katif disengagement. Between stories of miracles and loss of sacred Jewish lives, we spoke about foundational topics in Judaism that apply to every single Jew. I really hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Thanks. Rav Noam, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, David. Boker tov.
How are you doing?
Baruch Hashem, great to be here.
We tried to get this together for a few months. You're a busy guy.
Right, but only hityaesh, you never give up.
That's why when you said to me the other night, don't give up on me, I'm like, there's one thing I don't do. I don't give up on people.
Right.
And so I think the first thing I want to talk about is by way of an introduction, is why I wanted to do a podcast with you specifically. And I guess I could summarize where I'd love to take this, because there's many things that we could talk about. We could talk about any topic of Torah, but that's not what this is about, because I think when I saw you and your wife do that 2-hour session that Friday night in Ramot when you came for a Shabbaton and you talked about your experiences in Gush Katif.
Right.
It was incredibly powerful from a perspective of not just like what you went through, but spiritually as well, understanding what it means to be a nationalist, religious nationalist, if you want to use these awful labels, because they are. But anyway, it helps people to understand, I guess, where your kids go to school, minimally.
I guess so.
Maybe. So I guess I want to try and talk to you. We're going to talk about emunah. Also about Gush Katif, your experiences there.
Right.
And also the religious aspect of the secular state of Israel, secular state of Israel.
Right.
Even though, as we learn, and especially what we learn on Thursdays together as a group, there really is no secular Israel. There's just Jews.
Right.
And as a 𝗵𝗀 𝗺𝗫, the funniest thing is that I never thought anything different about Jews growing up. My innocence of not knowing was there's only really just Jews. Even I had to become religious to discover labels, which is a weird thing.
Unbelievable.
Right? I never knew such thing as like this thing, 𝗲𝗽𝗻𝗻 or 𝗥𝗍𝗫. I'm like, we're just Jews.
Right.
And I loved Israel. But then you learn like, well, what does that involve when it comes to the state of Israel? So I think a good place to start is your background. Briefly, your background. You're not from the same background as me. We're from different countries. So what sort of background did you have, and how did you get to Israel?
Right. Look, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, fairly small Jewish community. I would say on one hand, in a home that was open to American culture and the sports, etc.
But a religious home, Shomer Shabbat.
Well, of course, religious. But we were, on one hand, we were open to American culture in general. Like, I remember growing up with a Thanksgiving dinner.
Okay.
However, we had a flag on July 4th hanging out the door. On the other hand, I grew up in a home that was barely furnished. And that's because my parents were just temporarily here in Detroit. We're on our way to Israel. So why should we invest all that money to furnish a home that we're not even going to benefit from? For many years, I lived in a home without air conditioning because it doesn't make sense to invest in such a temporary home.
Was that common? I mean,
not common at all. No, not at all.
Where did your parents get that from?
That's a great question. Look, I would say from their parents. I remember my grandmother once opening the newspaper during the first Lebanon War. This is 1981. And she looked at the headline that we had lost 6 or 8 Jewish soldiers. And with tears in her eyes, she said, how many brothers are we losing? And my mother grew up in a home like that. We're thousands of miles away. But these chayalim, who we don't even know, we've never met, but they're brothers. Mm. And so I think they absorbed it in their homes.
Was there any Holocaust, post-Holocaust stuff in your family?
No, we were not directly affected by the Holocaust. Mm. But there was a certain draw to Eretz Yisrael and a need to be here. And I remember my mother having a watch with 2 faces on it, one local time and one time in Eretz Yisrael. And that's the kind of home I grew up in, that we're literally on our way. We're on our way to making aliyah.
What, other people in the community were like that, or was this the most extreme version of it?
It was really something unique in the landscape of the Detroit Jewish community. They were one of the founders. My parents were one of the founders of the Zionistic school there, Akiva, which has become Farber, because they wanted to be mechanech, a generation of children, to support the state of Israel and from a Torah perspective, and to live the dream of a Torah life, but at the same time to aspire to go to Eretz Yisrael one day. And it was one of the first schools in America that I think the only, where you spent your senior year in Israel in yeshiva. That was the way you crammed everything into 3 years in high school. Mm-hmm. And then it was built into the curriculum that you spent your senior year in yeshiva in Israel.
Were you very happy to live in an environment like that? Probably you did. I mean, you wouldn't have known any different, but there was this immediate passion and love that was thrust upon you.
Right. That's a great question. There's this one scene in my mind. I remember I must have been first or second grade, and I saw my mother opening a letter, and she burst out in tears. And I said, "Mom, what's going on?" And she said that we're very close to making aliyah, and your father went for some interviews in Israel, and we thought that he had a job. He was going to get a job offer, and we were going to go. But this letter is, was the letter that turned down his bid for the job. They weren't interested in having him. They decided on someone else, and she said that's why I'm like this. And I remember as a kid breathing a sigh of relief, because I loved my school and my friends, and I loved the Detroit Tigers, and this was my home. And I remember that scene. I remember that feeling as a kid, that
emotion.
Just that emotion of feeling that, like, the weight being lifted. Okay, so we're not making aliyah. I can be relaxed now.
How old were you this?
I must have been first or second grade.
Oh, okay.
But looking back now, what I would have given to grow up in this country, it's a totally different perspective now. But as a child, you don't realize the greatness of this country and the. Do
you think an aspect of that scene sort of compels you to do what you do? Because it's a very poignant scene to have in your mind. The fact that you brought that up as your instinctive memory, and knowing you as I know you, it's passion all the way, all the time.
I feel a certain desire to get the word out about Eretz Yisrael, about how special it is. This is the land of Hashras Hashchina. This is where the presence of God is can be felt and is tangible, and we see His hand in history. And yeah, for sure, I feel passionate about getting that word out. Definitely.
Did you have, in those years growing up, a very strong, as it developed, as you moved through your years, did you that identity, did it just become stronger and stronger in Detroit, or did you have to leave to come to?
No, I had to come here.
So tell me about that. When did you come to Israel? And
look, I came for visits, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry.
Was it emotional?
Like, the visits were special. I apologize. But the coming post high school, coming to yeshiva, I came to yeshiva in Shalavim, and it's like gates were open for me. And that's when you discover a new world, and you see the people living here, and you see the people living a dream that you didn't even realize existed.
Right.
That perfect synthesis between the Torah lifestyle and adherence to Torah and dedication to Torah, which I saw before in 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶. I saw that. But the daily kedusha of living in Israel and experiencing that, and just the perfect synthesis between those, that to me was an epiphany. That was a totally new light, an or chadash in my life. And it was really that year, and I stayed for a second year in yeshiva. It was really during that time when I decided, that this is a dream I have to be a part of.
You have to be here.
Right.
It seems to me as though some people, and again, I can only relate this to myself because I'm the only one that has lived my life. But when I used to come to Israel as a secular Jewish kid, and we used to come in the early 80s. So we first came in like 81, 82. Netanya, friends of my parents moved to Netanya from London, but they were South African. I remember coming, and that unmistakable emotion of this basically has no words. It only has the emotion, right? But what's strange and what I've discovered, because I didn't become religious until 2002.
I didn't hear that tissue or something.
Sure. 1 second.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
It's very moving for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Wait till we really get started. I see that, and what I've never understood is why don't all Jews feel this?
Right.
Because, and why did I feel it? My sister feels it. She lives in Zichron Yaakov. We talked about that. She hasn't been well, but Baruch Hashem, she's doing better. But other members of my family do not feel what we feel, where both me and my sister had to come, and even more so in my experience, when it was presented to me for the first time when I was 25, even though we have Bechira, I had no choice but to become religious in my being.
Wow.
Which, and I can relate to your emotions and your tears because it was like a magnet. It just made sense. But what doesn't make sense to me, if all Jews are Jews and we come from Avram and all these beautiful ideas, why doesn't everyone feel it?
Right.
And if we all felt it, all this shtuyot that goes on, it would
all just fall away.
It would fall away because we're in love with this place and we're in love with each other. But that isn't the case.
Right.
It's a strange phenomenon that Hashem has put into our people. And I don't know, you have any thoughts on that?
Look, is a famous book, Sefer HaKuzari.
Yeah.
It's basically a dialogue.
Just move the mic a little bit
Yeah.
closer. Yeah, that's it.
Sefer HaKuzari is a dialogue between the king of the Khazars and a Jewish scholar. And it was written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in medieval Spain because he wanted to supply the Jewish community of Spain at the time with the answers to all the challenges against Judaism.
Yeah.
So he's got the king challenging Judaism, he's got the scholar answering. There's one question in the book that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has the scholar unable to answer. He's got answers for everything.
Oh, yeah.
There's one question where Rabbi Yehuda Halevi puts into the mouth of the scholar, I can't answer that question. And the question was, if Eretz Yisrael is the God-given land to the Jewish people, so why doesn't everyone go?
Right.
Why isn't everyone going there? And the scholar says, Matzasa makom 𝗏𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗏. You found the place of my embarrassment. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was clearly trying to wake up his generation. If he was telling them, we can answer everything that the Goyim have to ask us, but this one, it means we have to get our act together. And
does that mean you could say it's the most challenging of all the questions? The connection.
It's challenging to the point that we don't really have a way to justify it. We can't. How do you justify the Jewish people not rushing back?
Right.
And what would he say today after the gates have been open? What would he say today? If he said 1,000 years ago, Matzata makom 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏,
I think he would collapse. It's an awful reality, because especially for people that love and have moved here and have made a life here, it's very, very challenging. Okay, you ended up in Israel.
Right.
Briefly, you studied here, but then when you got married at some point. But when did the Gush Katif thing come up? Where did you go to yeshiva, and then? So
after a number of years in yeshiva at 𝗏𝗯𝗯𝗶, a total of 7 years, and like I said, I felt at the beginning of my years in 𝗏𝗯𝗯𝗶, I felt like gates were open for me.
Right.
And after 7 years of yeshiva, I felt like I had. I'll never say the word mastered the Torah of my Rebbeim, but very much connected and embraced it. I was looking for...
Who were your Rebbeim?
Rav Moshe Gantz, Rav Michal Yamer, Rav 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶 Rav Aryeh Handler, Rav Gidon Binyamin, Rav Shmuel Nacham, other individuals who had a hashpah on me in yeshiva. I felt like I was looking for the next level, or to incorporate, to see other drachim, other paths in avodas Hashem, and see how I could incorporate that. And there was a yeshiva in Gush Katif, Torah Chaim, that had more of a Hasidic leaning to it. They were very into song and the more esoteric aspects of Judaism. And it was also new. I was looking for like a change of scenery, a change of environment, change of people. I was already married, and I was looking for a kollel that could sort of rejuvenate me. After 7 years of learning, you need some hischadshus, you need something new. So,
what year was this? This is like
1998. So I was very drawn to this yeshiva in Gush Katif, and my wife and I went there for a Shabbos. We fell in love with the place. A beautiful scenery. There was a strip of blue. You saw the sea from wherever you were in Gush Katif, and the palm trees, and life in the yeshiva, and the community that surrounded the yeshiva. It was all very powerful. So we fell in love, and we went down there to Gush Katif, and I continued my learning. And Lior became a very popular. Lior, my wife, became a very popular teacher there in Gush Katif.
To frame it for people who are listening who may not know, we're talking about an area that is in Gaza,
right?
And it doesn't need explanation why we're talking so specifically about this now. Here we are, 2025, with everything going on. The fact that it was a settlement, an enclave, whatever, inside Gaza, surrounded by, the worst of our enemies, as they've definitely proven. Did that cross your mind, and how did you overcome that? Or were you just the security aspect as an American Detroit guy, you were in Shalavim, which is in Israel proper, right? And now you're moving into the Wild East.
Right.
So how did that...
That's a great question. So at the time, believe it or not, it wasn't really a hostile environment. The yeshuvim themselves, the Jewish settlements themselves, were safe. There were army patrols and a very strong army presence. There was a need for about a 7-minute drive through the Arab population, the local Arab population, to get to Gush Katif.
From the border.
Right. From the green line. The green line. About a 7-minute drive. And then you enter the Gush Katif, the block of settlements. And there were hardly any incidents at the time.
I remember you said that was what stood out in that speech.
Right. We were post the first intifada. Things had settled down already. 𝗲𝗽𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗶, Judea and Samaria sometimes would peak. There would be peaks of violence. But believe it or not, Gush Katif was fairly safe. What there was a feeling in Israel at the time that Israel doesn't really care so much about the Gaza Strip. In Oslo, it was Jericho and Gaza first. That was the plan. And there was a feeling of that Israel didn't really care so much to hold the Gaza Strip. So we felt pretty idealistic going down there to show a Jewish presence. But there wasn't a lot of fear or concern about the security.
Initially.
Right. And this is September 98.
Okay. Right. And then how by 2005, obviously we know that was the expulsion, but in between that, what happened?
So it was about 2 years later. We're talking September 2000 now.
So pre 9/11.
Right.
Pre 9/11. It all connects together, all this stuff.
Right. What happens then? I had davened early Rosh Hashanah morning. I was watching the kids. Liara went to shul. At around 9 or 9:30, she walked in. I'll never forget her pale face, saying, "Someone just made an announcement in shul that everyone should go home and lock their doors and take out their weapons." Now, I'm a kid from Detroit. I know there are a lot of weapons in Detroit, but I didn't have any.
Right.
So I was not accustomed so much with what to do under those circumstances. And I'm like, "What's going on?" She's like, "No one really knows. There's just a lot of rioting going on the borders of our yeshuvim." Little did we know that was the beginning of a totally new period of our lives that would transform us. It really would. And that was like the official beginning of the second intifada.
Right.
There were attacks on the roads, not so much in the yeshuvim, but there were shootings on the roads.
That 7-minute drive became different, right?
Very different.
So describe that. What going in and out of?
It was saying Tehillim. It was saying Tefillah Haderech with a whole different kavana. it was, but mostly it was a lot of what you said before, emunah. It was emunah, it was belief, it was clinging on to the idea that the Jewish people need to be here. We're serving not just Gush Katif, but we're doing a service for the entire Jewish people. And just like a shliach tzibur, you know, the chazan, he has been called upon by the tzibur to perform a mission. So we felt empowered by the Jewish people. We're here to hold this area of land. And there was also a feeling that if we gave in, if 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶, because of the threats and because of the security, the new scenario, we gave in and we packed up and we left, that would be the beginning of the fall of Sderot and the fall of Ashkelon, and everything after that would be a domino effect. So despite the fact that there was a security concern, there was a lot of emunah that we need to be here. And there was also a lot of emunah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is protecting us. That there's no such thing as something that happens by chance. My wife likes to say that it was at that point in our lives that we learned how to internalize that every bullet has an address. And it's not just the decision of some terrorist, but the emunah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is walking you through those 7 minutes. And he's got the steering wheel, and he's protecting you if you're worthy of his protection. And there were those that for whatever reason, God removed that protection. Loved ones and dear friends that fell on that road. But it did not detract from our emunah that we need to be here, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is leading us.
On that point of emunah,
yeah.
So it's so central to being a Jew for all the reasons you just said. But in what you just said, I heard two types of emunah. There's nationalistic emunah,
right,
and then there's the individual. A lot of people, especially again people that I know from my family, friends, background, they understand this idea of faith. I mean, we don't really translate emunah as faith, faithfulness, loyalty, dedication to Hashem. It's not faith. We're not.
Right.
It's not that thing. It's not a belief. It's just whatever. It
can't be translated.
It can't be translated. We
Right.
spoke about that a few
Right.
months ago.
Right.
But in some people's minds, the idea of putting yourself in danger, perceived danger, is enough to not have you do it.
Right.
Just don't do it. Just
Right.
don't go there. And like when I try to say to people, again, it's family, come home to England now after October the 7th. And I'm
Come home what?
Come home to England now, they say to me. Come home. Why do you need to be there amongst this? And again, I'm like, well, if 8 million of us leave, we've lost everything. I don't equate it to just David Goodwin. It's all of us, because we all face the same choice. Let's go somewhere else. Let's go back to Germany, see how that works out. But it's still an uncomfortable thing. Hashem, it's not about Hashem will protect me, which is
that you can't know.
It's
impossible to know that.
It's the emunah on the faith, the commitment to whatever happens is what happens. That's the emunah.
Whatever happens is the will of God.
Yeah.
And there's nothing in this world that can happen that runs contrary
Nothing.
to the will of God.
Absolutely nothing.
Absolutely impossible. And with that emunah, we find strength and we find comfort.
And courage.
Right.
I remember there was one story that you told about that road, about that man with that crazy experience with
that's a great example.
Yeah, the American.
That's a great example, yeah.
So maybe tell that story.
Yeah, a good friend of mine in Gush Katif. Look, when you're living in Gush Katif with only a handful of Americans, so you befriend all the Americans and the English speakers, no matter what the age gap is.
You need someone to talk sports with.
Right.
Right.
So as a 20-year-old, I befriended this 50 or 60-year-old Moshe Saperstein, he stood out as soon as I got to Gush Katif because he had lost an arm in the Yom Kippur War. And which is a whole story in and of itself that I don't think I even told it in Ramo, did I? I have to get back to that story.
Right.
But Moshe Saperstein, one day we heard, was shot at on that 7-minute stretch. And Baruch Hashem, he was only hospitalized, but he was pretty severely injured. When he got out of the hospital, now he only had 2 fingers left. Meaning on the other hand, he had 2 fingers left. And I paid a Bikur Cholim visit. And I said, Moshe, do you want to talk about what happened? He said, I can talk about it, but you won't believe it. I was driving down the road. I was blasting my classical music, which is what I do when I drive through that road. I think when he drives in general. And I had my one hand on the top of the steering wheel, and at a certain point on that road, I heard gunshots, and I see my hand gushing blood, and I realized that I had been hit on the hand by a terrorist who obviously shot at me. I couldn't identify from where. I lost control of the car. The car ran into the railing on the side of the road, and I wasn't able to move. But then in my rear view mirror, I saw the terrorist that had shot at me, and he was approaching the car with a Kalashnikov in one hand and something in the other hand. And when he got closer to the car, I see in my rear view mirror, it was a hand grenade. And he lobs the hand grenade at my car. He's about 10 feet away. He lobs it at my car the way he said it, like a quarterback. It lands I hear it land on the top of my car, does not explode. I hear it rolling. I see it rolling down the windshield onto the hood of the car, does not explode, lands in front of the car. And I'm saying Shema Yisrael, ready for an explosion, but it never happened. The terrorist is still behind me in my rear view mirror. I see him approaching the left side of the car, the driver's side of the car. He nonchalantly walks over to my window. I think he even used the word gracefully. He gracefully lifted the Kalashnikov, pointed at me. There's about a foot between me and the barrel. I'm looking down the barrel of that gun, and now I know it's the end. And there's nothing I can do. I'm helpless, and I hear gunshots. And I hear gunshots, but I'm still alive. And I don't feel any pain, and I see the terrorist fall. And I look again in my rearview mirror, and there's an army jeep that heard the first gunshots, saw him aiming his rifle at me, and from about 500 meters away, they were able to gun him down. I was rushed to the hospital, and b'nisei nisim, as they say, miracles of miracles, I'm still here to tell the story. That to me is emunah. There's a person who's absolutely helpless.
Right.
Nothing he can do. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu wills it, you're going to get out of it.
No matter what.
We cannot understand the instances that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not will it. We cannot understand why a good friend of mine, Rav 𝗥ส์🗯🗶🗶, Hashem yikom damo, may God avenge his blood, he did not merit that protection. But we believe that there's a decree from above that it was his time to go. And he went, al Kiddush Hashem, he went sanctifying God's name on that very road. He didn't have the protection of Moshe Saperstein. But that to me is what emunah is. Knowing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has your back, and he's protecting you when need be, and he also removes the protection when that's what's necessary.
It's ultimately the foundation of being a Jew.
Right.
There is nothing more. It's how we've survived all of this for thousands of years, and how we picked ourselves up after October the 7th and have done what we've done here and abroad. But here specifically has been different, which we understand because we lived through it.
If I could just say something critical about Yom HaAtzmaut. I celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut. But there's one thing I heard from my Rebbe, Rav Moshe Gans, a word of criticism. We say in 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶 𝗡𝗺 which is translated as, we've been hoping for 2,000 years. Rav Moshe Gans says, you have to be a fool to hope for anything for 2,000 years, because hope has a connotation of doubt. I hope it's going to happen, unsure. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I'm hoping that there'll be an ingathering of the exiles. Who hopes for 2,000 years after so many disappointments? There's only one thing that has the ability to survive 2,000 years of exile. It's not called 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶. 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶 is not the right word. It's emunah. Emunah can persevere. Emunah can prevail 2,000 years of what our nation has gone through. Tikva doesn't have the ability to do that. And Rav Kook actually wrote a poem in reaction to 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶.
Oh, he heard 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶 in his lifetime?
The original poem 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶 was written, I think, in 1910, 1920. It had several stanzas. We only sing one of the stanzas today.
Right.
And as a response to the song of 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶, Rav Kook wrote his own poem called emunah.
Wow, I did not know that.
𝗲𝗽𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 emunah ne'emana. The emunah that we have in our hearts, that's going to last forever. There's nothing that can extinguish that fire. 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶, what right do you have to keep hoping if you don't have the words of the prophets? If you don't believe the words of the prophets, so what are you hoping for? After all that darkness, you haven't lost 𝗥𝗯𝗯𝗶. emunah, you never lose. When you have the words of Yeshayahu Hanavi, 𝗥ծիոն թեյցեի Torah, you're going back one day.
It's a guarantee.
It's a guarantee.
There's no wiggle room.
Right. When you have the words of the prophet saying, Od yeshvuz kenimuz kenot b'rechovot Yerushalayim.
Right.
You're here in Krakow and in Tunis, but one day they're going to be old people sitting on their canes, with their canes in Jerusalem, watching the kids playing in the streets. There's no darkness of the gullus that can extinguish that prophecy.
Do you think now the idea of tikva, the hope, is not necessarily it's the hope we're relying on, but the hope that fulfillment will come true soon? Not that it won't come through or that there's any doubt, but we just so desperately hope that it happens as soon as possible.
That's definitely true. We do have this shoresh tikva in the Nevi'im. We do have it. Kaveh al Hashem, chazak v'yametz libecha, v'kaveh al Hashem. Hope that it's going to happen as soon as possible, that we won't have to see more suffering. We won't have to see another October 7th. We won't have to see another Kaddish on our Herzl.
Amen.
That you can have hope for.
Right. But it's not foundational. The hope is not the foundation. I think that's that's very beautiful. With that all being said, and we could talk about your Gush Katif experience for 50 podcasts, but then came the expulsion,
right?
Which, from my perspective, having become religious in 2002, and again, what you see of me today was just like I just wasn't connected. I'd already become religious. I was Shomer Shabbat already when the expulsion happened, but I wasn't in tune. I've been like, I was a baby at that point religiously, 2-3 years, whatever it was. And I didn't really connect to it. And I also became religious through the Haredi world, but that's not for now. I had to, and I say this not critically of the Haredi world, of which I have tremendous hakarat hatov, because I wouldn't be sitting here without them. Because outreach wasn't a dati lumi thing. It was the Haredim that brought me to God. But it was Rav Kook and the Dati Lumi way that brought me to God with Eretz Yisrael. It's very different, as I'm sure you understand. But at that point, it wasn't part of my life. But since then, I've seen films and I've heard you speak and others speak. So what was that like? Because it's going to be a segue to me asking you about our relationship with the secular state. So firstly, what was it like after those incredible years living in Gaza, Gush Katif, Gaza?
Right.
So what was it like?
Look, it was heartbreaking. It was like a very intimate relationship, a bond that was broken.
Could you believe it was happening?
It was very, very, even when the plans came out and a date was even set, it was hard to imagine that such a thing could be carried out. Like, who are the individuals that are going to do this? Like, are the chayalim really capable of carrying people out of their homes without, a decision that was never democratically backed by the country? There were never elections about this. It was never something that was debated publicly. Are there people, like, who's going to be able to carry this out? It was very difficult to imagine that the country would be able to do it. But as a result of a certain political climate in the country that I don't know if you want to go into now, they were able to do it. It was very, very difficult to see, obviously. It was heartbreaking. It was like I said, it was like a divorce of a nation from a beloved land. And
did it stretch, talking about emunah, did it stretch your individual emunah in ways that you couldn't have also up to that point imagined? Because this is the very nikudah of emunah.
Right.
Every person, your wife says, there's a bullet with this was an entire community and the giving back of land.
Right.
And we've seen what's happened to it since. Like, we're all justified in saying that should never have happened. But it did happen. And that means Hashem okayed it.
Hashem willed it. Not just okayed it, he willed it.
We can't have it both ways.
Right.
He willed it and it happened. And so how did you relate to that?
The way I processed it was I said to myself, if God willed this, it means that we're not yet worthy. It means that we, the religious community, need to be doing more. If we weren't able to get the message across to the Israeli public that our connection with the land is not just a pragmatic, technical, this is not just a safe haven from anti-Semitism. It's not just a land that's meant to serve as a social framework. If we weren't able to get the message across that there's a segula here in the land, that there's a holiness in the land, and there's a bond in this land, that a natural bond between people and land, that means we need to be doing more. That means we need to inspire more. That means we need to educate more and enlighten more and maybe be more of a role model to the rest of Israeli society. There's more that we can do. There's got to be more that we can do, because there's a truth here that we were not able to convey, but I believe that we can. And I think post-October 7th, I think a lot of that truth is being conveyed. I think people are learning the truth now of how what a terrible mistake that was, to give away parts of Eretz Yisrael for nothing in return, with a hope of peace. I think the message is getting across now, but it means that we, the Torah community, needs to be doing more to get the Torah message out there.
So really the expulsion was a part of a much bigger process.
Correct.
And again, that's the emunah, being in the moment and not judging the moment as if it's the be all and end all. It's very hard. We say these things, but we are humans. It's easy to see how people struggle with this. You know, I was remembering why the passionate WhatsApp message that I sent you on January the 20th. That was not the first message I said that we should do a podcast, but it was the most potent because it was a day after the
hostage deal.
The hostage deal, which
right.
even though I was here on October the 7th, obviously we lived here, right. Been here ever before that and since, obviously. But that Sunday was darker for me than October the 7th.
Wow.
October the 7th was nuts. But that Sunday, the 19th of January, had more darkness to it because it's like we're capitulating. What are we? What is this? And that's not for one moment saying I didn't want my brothers
right.
and sisters back.
Right.
God forbid, I want them all back. But the question was, how is this the only way that we're giving in to these creatures that are not people? And it looks like an acquiescence to Trump. And I'm like, who are we that we do this? And so that propelled me more to say we've got to talk.
Right.
It's hard. Emunah is hard, right?
Right. But emunah is also like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. That's why those years in Gush Katif for us strengthened our emunah.
Right.
The more you have to apply it, the more you have to remind yourself that God's hand is ultimately what's guiding everything on earth. The more you have to remind yourself of that and internalize it, the stronger that koach, that force becomes in your life, the more dominant it becomes. That's why the more people are tested, and the more they have to exercise their emunah, they don't pass that test and remain on the same level. They've attained a new level. That emunah is stronger and more is expected of them now.
You have to go through the test, which is the nisayon, to have the nes, which is the impossible coming possible.
That's interesting.
It's one of the things they said in the Kiruv movement.
That's interesting.
Because you feel like, it's okay to be tested. So, Rav Noam, when do you think enough is enough? Meaning, when do you think the tests are over? I don't expect you to have the answer. Right. But what is enough?
Right. Look, Chazal tell us, Hayom im bekolo tishma'u. It can happen today. We have to realize that the end of all our suffering can happen today if we make ourselves worthy of it. If we ask ourselves, where can we be better? And this is really where I see the role of the Torah community today. The Torah community, the more we ask ourselves, where can we up our game? Where can we improve ourselves? Where can we be a little better? I believe that we can be a model for the entire Jewish world. We all can start asking that question. Instead of pointing at the other community and saying, it's your fault, all the troubles are because of you, what would happen if we altered that mentality just a little bit and we all started asking ourselves, what can we do more? Instead of fighting with each other and saying, these are the problems that you have. I'd like to see a movement that says, okay, what are the problems that we have that we can be better at? And if we all start doing that, then I think Hayom in Bekolo Tishma'u, the Geula could come today.
I mean, you spoke about that on Thursday. That was the piece that we spoke about. How Rav Kook was able to penetrate that.
Right.
That's why we look at him as some kind of I don't know if a navi is strong enough. I don't know. He's
a seer. I call him a seer.
A seer and a shaliach.
Right.
Because he was able to penetrate. He must have made religious minds back in the 1900s.
Right.
He must have twisted them into a pretzel. Because he's like, no, I see these socialist, communist, kibbutznikim.
Right.
And I love every part of them. I relate to that because religious people looked at me and said, you're worthy to come and become a Jew. But it's... that's his message, right?
Right. He was able to see beyond the surface. And I think as his Talmidim, I think we have to do more of that. We have to do more of that. Look past the surface that separates us and penetrate into that holy fire that he calls, that he refers to. 𝗥ส์𝗦𝗵 תוקד על המזבח, just like there was always a fire going on in Jerusalem. There's a holy fire in each and every one of us. And flames have a tendency to join together when they're close, right? And they become one larger one.
Right.
And that's what I'm hoping we can do today.
So there's a place where there can be hope.
Right.
How did you, when you were growing up, we'll finish off now, how did you look at non-religious people when you were growing up? And how has that shifted over the years as you've learned more Torah and in the Torah of 𝗏𝗃 𝗔, the Torah of Rav Kook and others? How do you look at Jews?
Look, I look at the Jewish people as like limbs of a body. We all have a role. And when we work together, then we have the energy, we have the capabilities of Am Yisrael. When we all start to do our own thing and we start to disconnect from each other, in that act itself, we're limiting ourselves, we're handicapping ourselves. So when I see another Jew, I see an individual that if we can only get together and do this together, we can bring geula to the world. We can fix the world.
It's not necessarily about making others religious. It's such a immature thing to say. And that's why I don't hold by that. I've experienced it the other way. No one tried to, I think, not make me religious. They tried to open my eyes. And I feel like I'm in a constant journey of eye-opening. And the more you open your eye, the more you open your heart. If you allow it in. The division, I always say it, Hitler did not distinguish between Jews.
Correct.
Jews distinguished between Jews. He didn't care the color of your kippah, your community, whether you daven shacharit,
right,
whether you ate kosher food, you're a Jew. That's how we need to see each other. If there's anything we can learn from Hitler, I can't even believe I'm saying it, 𝗍𝗪, but he did think that way. He saw us clearer than maybe we see ourselves.
Not only that, but he also realized, I was once in Yad Vashem, and they have a list of countries with numbers of Jews in them. Mm. And at that point, the tour guide stopped and said, there was one island off the coast of Italy where Hitler heard there was one Jew. And he went through the expense and whatever trouble there was to send a boat with the SS to get that one Jew.
Wow.
Because he realized that every Jew is a flame.
He knew it.
And you could extinguish everyone, but you leave one Jew, he can rekindle the flame. And we all have to believe in that flame that we have inside of us.
Last question.
Yeah.
And this, again, deserves hours, but people who say, religious people, not, let's just say be kind, not on the fence that we have perched ourselves on in terms of our outlooks, call it dati lumi, whatever you want to call it. When people say, how on earth, as a religious Jew, can you connect yourself to something that was started in the most anti-Torah, anti-God way?
Right.
I mean, I'm putting you on the spot here to give it's not a one-sentence answer.
Right.
But what's your response? It saddens me because I wouldn't have been brought back if people would have thought that of me. But to encapsulate that, here we are on the brink of Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut.
Right.
We're going to be dancing to your guitar playing music, Bezrat Hashem, on Thursday. Or better than that, in the Beit HaMikdash. How do you answer a person who says, how can I be part of this? How can I join the army? How can I do anything? They're secular.
Right. I would say, listen, the surface looks very secular, but at the heart of the movement, what was at the very core of that movement? It was a movement of return. In Europe, what were the nations doing that were becoming secular? They were abandoning anything that had to do with religion. They abandoned the language, Latin, and they started taking on the language of their local countries. They became more German, more French. What did the secular Zionists do? They said, let's go back to our historic homeland. And they didn't even want to replace it for anything else. Let's go back to our language and go back to our homeland. And Rav Kook says, what was at the core of that movement? What at the core of that movement was a return. And the psukim refer to a return to Israel before a return to religion. Hashivenu Hashem Eilecha v'nashuva. What are the two returns? There's got to be a return to the land. And only when you have Avira, the Eretz Yisrael, only the air of Israel can inspire us to embrace religion as well. So I view that movement, even though they were declared seculars and anti-religious, but it was the first step to a great process that's unfolding. A return to the land that will ultimately lead to a return to Torah. Mirza Hashem, it should be soon.
Rav Noam, thanks for coming.
Thank you,
I really
David.
appreciate it. I hope we inspire
David.
people. How you doing? You okay? It's emotional stuff.
Yeah, it's charged, but thank you for having me. Thank you.